12 o'clock on your Friday. Welcome in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on the game. I will tell you, we were supposed to be rejoined by Terry Ford in the Herndon Chevrolet studios here, but as he informed me at like 6:45 this morning, Jay and Elijah did have some trouble in returning to Columbia. Obviously, had a lot of storms last night, so I imagine flights were a little bit chaotic. Did say that they spent the night at the airport, so they're probably not in the best shape today to come in here and do 3 hours of radio. So it's me flying solo for the next couple of hours here on the halftime show, but plenty to get to over the course of these next couple of hours, as we obviously have a full week of SEC Media Days to recap. All the coaches got up to the podium and talked and did what you're supposed to do at Media Days. You're supposed to hype up your program. You're not supposed to say anything too controversial, and you're supposed to leave a positive impression on the whole of the SEC and really the greater landscape of college football, to where people might say, we may not have thought that team was very good, but now I'm thinking a little bit different going into this year. And again, when toe finally meets leather coming up and for South Carolina 43 days from now, then our opinions will either be justified or changed depending on what happens on the field. But I thought overall, Media Days was as you kind of expect. One thing that kind of sticks out to me about Media Days this year, we still have Kiffin. We still have Sam Pittman for now. But it's becoming very glaring and evident the de-evolution of personalities when it comes to college football. And the SEC used to be rich with them, right? I mean, there was a time where you had Saban at Alabama. You had Spurrier at South Carolina. You had Dan Mullen at Mississippi State. Before he came back to Ole Miss, you had Lane Kiffin at Tennessee, back in 2009. Urban Meyer at Florida. Like you just had a lot of dynamic personalities that always brought you in, you know what I mean, that were attention grabbers. Anytime they took to the microphone in a press conference or whatever media availability, because you knew there was a chance they could say something that was a little off the rails. Mike Leach, obviously, who we lost a couple years ago now, was a favorite of so many when it came to things that he would say behind the microphone. And kind of listening to everybody talk this week, that, you have Kiffin, which he was a little more subdued for the most part, and he did lose his dad, just over, last week. So I'm sure there's a lot on his mind to maybe why he wasn't quite his dynamic self, as it is. And again, Sam Pittman's still there at Arkansas until he inevitably gets fired, which I'm afraid might be happening sooner rather than later out there in Fayetteville. But a lot of coaches just are kind of average in terms of that personality at this point in time. And with the way college sports is now, because it's a business at the end of the day, that's a reason why realignment has gotten as haywire as it has up to this point, because it all boils down to money. These schools are looking what's going to benefit them the best financially on what conference they should be in. So when you're the face of a company, or in this sense a program, you're going to try your best to toe the line, say what needs to be said, smile, shake hands, and not drum up too much controversy. And that's kind of the evolution of the modern SEC coach, really the modern coach in college football. And yes, we still have the Gundys and guys like that out there that say outlandish things that they probably should think twice before they actually, end up saying those kind of things. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast. And I'm afraid in 10 years' time, when again the Kiffins or whoever may be making their way out of coaching or whatever it is, that everybody's going to be kind of just a stick in the mud where we don't go into Media Days expecting anybody to give us any notable quotes. Even Jimbo Fisher at A&M could fly off the handle at times. The sliced bread thing, the back and forth with Saban he had a couple years ago, there's a lot of meat on the bone with some of those guys in terms of things they can say. But for the most part, the SEC coaches were very status quo with what you expect them to say. And, I don't think anybody drummed up too much controversy at the end of the week when it came to what was said at the podium. Shane Beamer, of course, spoke on Monday, which I mentioned to Chris a little bit earlier. Because so much happens at media days, you're getting 4 coaches a day, you get all the players and all that kind of stuff. We obviously had a ton of people from around the conference sit in with us and, have some interviews that it feels like the beginning of the week was a year ago. So Carolina's day, is not exactly as fresh on people's minds as of right now. But I thought Beamer came in and conveyed the message they wanted to convey. Where again, they know they're going to be doubted. They know they're not going to be anybody's favorite in the SEC by any means, or likely appear in many people's, if any's, top half when it comes to the media poll. Which again, I'm continuing to refresh things because that should be coming out sometime today. Because they typically put it up the day after, media days ends. And in fact, actually, we do have the media poll up. We'll get to that. We'll dive into that in a couple minutes here, but kind of want to finish my thought on this. Carolina knows where they're going to stand in a lot of people's eyes. That they're not a favorite. They're not even a dark horse. And they didn't give you a lot of reason to believe that a season ago. You go 5-7 because here's the interesting dynamic, right? Where the first 2 years under Beamers, we talked about ad nauseum, you overachieved. You went to a bowl when nobody thought you were going to win more than 2 freaking games your first year, and then you go out there and pick up 2 of the bigger wins in program history to cap off year number 2 and get yourself to 8 wins. There's a lot of reason to believe that Carolina was a dark horse team going in 2023, and then that all went sideways when we went 5-7. Now, yes, the injuries and all that kind of stuff that were the reason for those things happening, but anybody that was like looking at the South Carolina bandwagon or the hype train, however you want to phrase it, immediately got off. Now, like, oh, well, it's just Carolina being Carolina. Whatever, we'll move on to somebody else. Missouri ended up kind of being that dark horse team at the end of the day last year. So nobody's really expecting a whole lot out of Carolina. Nobody's looking at them and saying, ooh, that's a team that could win 8 games, maybe 9 games. Watch out, Alabama. Watch out, Oklahoma. This team could come in here and give you some problems. They might. We don't know. We're going to have to see when football starts getting played. But that seems to be the team message this year. It's like you're going to hear doubt. When you turn on the radio or TV or get on Twitter, you're going to see people telling you that South Carolina is not very good. And 43 days away from kickoff, we still don't know. But they believe, and it's the right way to think, they believe that what they have is going to be good enough when the season starts. And, instead of being the I told you so and just saying, oh, well, we're going to be great, we're going to do this, this, and that, they're taking the just wait and see approach, which I think is perfectly fine. I don't have a problem with that. Beamer has been criticized in the past for being, maybe a little bit out there and forward with some of the things that he says. Not that he was wrong in saying them, but maybe being a little bit too forward on some things that may come back to bite him later. So he's taken, again, as I've said several times this morning, the walk softly and carry a big stick approach. It's like, we know what we have. We're going to go out there and prove it. And then everybody else is going to come to us later on and say, man, we're wrong about you guys. And we can relish in that when that day comes. But it was a very business-like approach to media days, which I felt like is the exact way you need to do it. You know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with having fun. There's nothing wrong with, being entertaining. But again, when you come off 5-7 year, that your entire fan base looked at and said, that's not acceptable. You should, if nothing else, the expectations of South Carolina, you don't have to be in the college football playoff every year. You don't have to be the national champion or something like that. It'd be great if you are. Like, our fan base will love that, obviously. But the minimum standard is at least making a bowl. And when you didn't do that, it feels like that soured a lot of people on where Beamer is to this point. And again, he's not on the hot seat. I'm not even going to entertain that conversation because that's just not true at this point in time. Could he be after this season? Yeah, if things go bad again. But where he stands right now, I think his job's safe no matter what. Um, but again, it was disappointing to the team, disappointing to Beamer, disappointing to the fan base, and they know that. And they know instead of telling you what it's going to be, they just want to go out there and show you. And fingers crossed that it happens. We got 43 days until Old Dominion rolls into town. Hopefully, as Chris and I were talking about, you know, the first couple of years under Coach Beamer when it came to those opening games that they won, you still didn't come away from those games feeling fantastic, right? It's like, okay, you know, the Eastern Illinois game, Georgia State game, there's a lot of things of those games you could pick apart. Ideally, you'd love to see South Carolina go out there against Old Dominion week number 1 and just flatten them by 70 points. Sellers has a great game. You know, Harbor catches a couple touchdowns. Rocket Sanders runs all over the place. Defense gets some sacks and takeaways and all those kind of things. Now, that isn't going to tell us everything we know about this team because it's Old Dominion. Again, no disrespect to the Monarchs, but that's a team that, based on the talent level you have, you shouldn't have any trouble beating. But you'd much rather walk away from that game saying, we flattened those guys, and still having some questions than saying, man, we had to sweat that out against Old Dominion week number 1. What's this Kentucky game going to look like? Like, you'd rather have the overbearing confidence of just demolishing an opponent than getting into a dogfight with the Group 5 team. So, again, I don't think anybody's, shifted their opinions on South Carolina based on what was said earlier on this week. But it's going to be interesting to see how the perception of this team might evolve as the season does roll along. I mentioned just a few minutes ago, the SEC media poll officially has been released. We'll dive into it. Where does Carolina fall? Who's at the top? What does that mean for the conference coming up this year? That's all coming up next. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo today, going until 3 here on the game. Welcome back. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo with you today, as I'm sure Terry Ford might be passed out somewhere after spending a night in the airport trying to get back from Dallas. So we'll give him the day off. We'll get back in here on Monday, and things will get back to normal. As by that point in time, we'll be at 40 days away until kickoff. So it's getting closer. Birdies with Beamer coming up next week. We'll hear from Coach Beamer, as well as should be all the assistants as well, getting more of a full scope on what's going on with this South Carolina team as we get closer and closer to the start of the season. As I mentioned, something we've talked about this entire week, the media poll from SEC Media Days has officially been released. Of course, for those that don't know, every media member that gets to go out there to Media Days gets the opportunity to cast a ballot for how they think the SEC standing is going to shake out and who they think their conference champion is going to be. Here's the good news. South Carolina did receive a vote for conference champion. One to be exact. Now, that is out of teams that did receive a vote for conference champion. They're the only one to get a single vote. Georgia, to no surprise, got 165. Texas had 27. Alabama with 12. Ole Miss with 4. Vanderbilt with 2, as well as LSU. Vanderbilt always gets 1 vote just for somebody to be funny. They actually got 2 this year. Not sure what that says about who voted for them as the conference champion, but regardless, at least somebody believes in Carolina to the point that they think they're going to win the conference championship. All right, now the all very important full conference standings. And again, we've abandoned divisions. This is no longer you're picked 3rd in the East or 5th in the West or whatever. It is truly a 1 through 16 of how the SEC standings are going to shake out, and the top 2 teams get to represent the SEC in Atlanta. From South Carolina's stake, they come in number 13. So they find themselves, as expected, above Arkansas at 14, Mississippi State at 15, and Vanderbilt at 16. And I talked about this a couple weeks ago with kind of where I thought Carolina was going to be, which I felt was somewhere between 11th to 13th. There's a big difference between 13th and then 14th and the rest in these SEC standings, because those are 3 programs. Arkansas is probably going to have to fire Sam Pittman before the year's over. Mississippi State's beginning a rebuild with Jeff Lebby. And Vanderbilt, well, they're just Vanderbilt. They're always going to consistently be towards the bottom of the SEC. South Carolina, I think, is above the line of programs that we just all know are probably going to be terrible this year, which are those 3 schools. Carolina's above that line. Carolina has hope, plenty of optimism for what this team could be. I'm not saying they're going to go out there and win 9 or 10 games, but can at least get to a bowl game, if nothing else, this year. Company around them is interesting, and as I kind of expected this to be the case. Florida's above them at 12. Kentucky above them at 11. Auburn above them at 10. We talk about the importance of that week 2 game. We can get to some thoughts from Coach Stoops a little bit later on in the show. We talk about the importance of that week 2 game on the road in Lexington, Kentucky, and how big of a swing game that's going to be for both schools. If Carolina wins that and can start the season 2-0, assuming that you beat Old Dominion, I see a very feasible path to get to 6 wins, get to a bowl game, all that good stuff. If you lose that game, starting to really split hairs on trying to find those 6 wins. And unless we just see this team take off in a positive direction that we, weren't expecting, like Sellers goes on a Heisman run, Debo Williams is the front runner for the Butkus Award or something like that. Those kind of things, which would be great. I'd love that, obviously. Everybody here would love that, obviously. But until we see that, we're not going to know. So, again, that week 2 game is of vital importance. And, again, 2 programs that are very even, very close to each other, have usually been in South Carolina and Kentucky. Florida above them, I can't get behind that, because as we've talked about so many times, we know Napier is on a very, very warm, if not hot seat at this point in time. I really struggle to see Florida making a bowl game based on how daunting their schedule is. And really, 1, 2. I mean, I look at Florida as maybe like a 4-win team this year. So, and again, maybe it's because they have a returning quarterback, have some returning contributors that they know about. Maybe that's why they're getting the benefit of the doubt here, as opposed to Carolina with a redshirt freshman quarterback, a lot of guys from the transfer portal. Maybe that's why. But I struggle to see Carolina being lower in the standings than Florida this year just because of what Florida has to deal with on their schedule. I feel like Carolina can have a better record than Florida in the SEC. Like, I feel pretty comfortable for the most part saying that at this point in time. So that's where Carolina falls on the lower end of things. What about the top? What do the contingent of media at the SEC think is going to happen at the top? Who's going to be going to Atlanta? Well, no surprise, Georgia's at number 1. They got the most points, votes, however you want to phrase it. And number 2, it is the Texas Longhorns. Texas and Georgia, based on the SEC media poll, are projected to be the SEC championship game in Atlanta coming up in early December. That is going to rub people the wrong way, because this idea that Texas can come in and immediately jump in line above everyone and immediately be a contender not only for the conference, for the national championship in year number 1, that is almost sacrilegious when it comes to the SEC. Nobody comes in the SEC and has that much success right out of the gate. Texas might. Texas is a very, very good team with a lot of returning talent, not only from last year's team, but also coming in from the transfer portal. I said this earlier. In my mock media poll, I put Texas at number 2. I thought Texas has a good shot at being there. That's just not disrespectful to the other teams in the SEC. I just think Texas is as advertised. Does that mean they're going to go undefeated? No, I don't think so. I think they're going to trip up a few times. That Georgia game in October is certainly not going to be easy. I still think they can do enough to get to Atlanta, though. And if they do that, I think it goes without saying Texas would be back at that point in time. Regardless of what happens in the playoff or anything after that, if Texas makes the SEC championship game in year number 1, then we all have to agree that Texas is back. Alabama comes in at number 3. As I've talked about a lot today, they get the benefit of the doubt, to me, right? Like, yeah, you lost the greatest coach of all time, and you did lose some talent. Caleb Downs went to Ohio State famously, but you still returned the vast majority of what was a Rose Bowl team a year ago, a team that was close to returning to another national championship game. Like, this is still a very deep, very loaded roster, in addition to another great recruiting class they brought in, guys from the transfer portal. Like, they're still going to be good, or at least I think they're still going to be good. Until proven otherwise, I can't in good faith say that Alabama is suddenly going to fall off the face of the earth. Now, if they go out there and they drop their first 3 conference games, and it's going to be like, okay, yeah, all right, well, things are going in the wrong direction, and the Kalen DeBoer era may end up being short-lived. But until I see that, until I have definitive evidence with my own eyes that Alabama's not Alabama anymore, I feel like you got to give them the benefit of the doubt. To me, maybe you think differently. Maybe you think it's over. They're going to go 6-6 and be playing the Birmingham Bowl from now on. God, the people of Alabama would hate that so much. They could not stand to watch their program devolve into that after having so much success for so long. But I give them the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. Ole Miss comes in at 4. They're a team that we've discussed many times with the talent they bring back and bring in from the transfer portal. I got them in my playoff. I think a lot of people will. Because you're too talented to not be successful enough. And again, you don't have to make the SEC championship game to go into the playoff now with the expanded 12-team format. And Ole Miss might be the perfect team to slide in at a 3 or 4 spot and get in as, I don't know, maybe the 9 or 10 seed. or something like that. Very, very possible. I mentioned LSU comes in at number 5, round the top 5. Missouri at 6, Tennessee 7, Oklahoma 8, A&M at 9. As I mentioned, Auburn is at 10. A lot of people very high on A&M. First year under Mike Elko, get Connor Wegman back. You know, not a completely gutted roster, which is something that does happen a lot when it comes to coaches being fired, but not a bad place for A&M as far as what people think they're going to be in year number 1 under Mike Elko. With the release of the media poll, we also get our first, second, and third team SEC selections, all SEC teams. And Gamecocks lead pair on these lists, which I have that coming up. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head flying solo going until 3 on your Friday on the game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo today. Terry will be back in here on Monday as things will kind of get back to normal after the busy week that was SEC Media Days with the whole crew out there in Dallas. And as I mentioned in the last segment, the official release of the SEC Media Poll coming out a little bit earlier on this morning, and South Carolina finds themselves 13th. So, as Beamer kind of expected, not a whole lot of people high outside of the one person that voted, Carolina to make the SEC championship, or to be the SEC champion, not even make the championship game, to be the SEC champion. One person out there thinks that Carolina will be in the college football playoff, which, hey, I would not complain. We would all love that. That'd be fantastic for what we do on a daily basis here at, the game. We'll see if that happens. But with the release of the media poll, we also get the SEC preseason all-SEC teams. Who do we think the best players are going to be in the league on a first, second, and third team basis? Starting off with the offense, and as you scroll through the first team, you're not going to see any Gamecocks on that. Though, second team you do. And this doesn't come as a huge surprise. It's Rocket Sanders as the second team, or one of the second team running backs with the SEC, alongside C.J. Baxter at Texas and Montrell Johnson at Florida. Now, the catch to this with Rocket Sanders is when he was healthy 2 seasons ago, rushing for 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns, was legitimately one of the best running backs in the entire conference. But we live in such a what have you done for me lately, instant gratification type of society, especially when it comes to sports, that even though that was only 2 years ago, a lot of that success has been forgotten by people. And they look at what you did a season ago. He was banged up, only got a little over 200 yards on the ground, scored 2 touchdowns. A lot of people can say that's damaged goods, or they can't definitively say that you're one of the best, that you're the best running back in the conference if you've not seen that in 2 full years. Because, again, Quinshon Judkins was the guy he was head-to-head with 2 seasons ago. Judkins is now gone. He is now in the, now in the Big Ten with Ohio State. But that doesn't automatically mean that Rock Sanders is going to assume that spot. And for those that are curious, the first team running back spots went to Trevor Etienne, who was transferred over from Florida to Georgia. And then Jarquez Hunter out at Auburn, and team that, because they couldn't throw the ball very well last year, had to rely on the run game quite a bit, and Jarquez Hunter was a very, very big part of that. So again, Sanders pops up on the second team list when it comes to all SEC offense. Nobody from South Carolina on the third team list. So Sanders just ends up being the lone representative for any of the offensive teams based on how the SEC media pick things. Defensive side of the ball. Once again, scrolling through the first team, do not see any names from South Carolina pop up. Second team, kind of again, as you expect, it is Debo Williams at linebacker. He is the lone South Carolina Gamecock on any of the defensive team, on the second team defense for South Carolina at linebacker, alongside Anthony Hill Jr. from Texas and Small Molden from Georgia. And we know Debo's tackling machine. Debo brings a lot of guys to the ground. Probably needs to improve on his pass rush a little bit, get a little more involved in that, get those numbers a little bit better. But still, second team is nothing to be ashamed of by any means. You're still viewed as one of the top handful of linebackers in the entire conference. And Debo, maybe he uses that as the chip on his shoulder that he was only second team and not first team as his, motivation going into this year. He's not the only defender, though, that appears on any of these teams, because when you look at third team defense, you have both Tonk Hemingway as well as Nick Emanwari make their way onto that third team list. Emanwari is interesting because he's somebody that has a lot of potential as far as the draft coming up, next year. Is entering year number 3. Has obviously basically played from the jump in his time here at South Carolina. That if you can make an argument, maybe a second team type of guy, but Carolina's secondary was not what they were expecting last year, and maybe that dings him a little bit from being a part of that, but still able to find his way on this list as a third-team guy alongside of Tonka Hemingway, who, again, if you believe what was heard in the offseason, there were opportunities for Tonka Hemingway to maybe go somewhere else, and South Carolina was able to retain him, in addition to adding to and retaining more guys from that defensive tackle room that we expect to probably be the best unit on this team, certainly on the defense. With the pass rush they should be able to generate, and just the rotation of bodies they're going to have, because that was something they weren't as lucky with last year. That, they can roll, easily 6 deep at that spot this year, which could hopefully benefit the defense and the team as a whole. Lastly, we get down to specialist, and it feels weird to say there's no South Carolina specialists that have made it onto the first team list for the SEC, and just one on any of these specialist lists, that being Hunter Rogers of the second team All SEC at long snapper. Special teams was not up to standard a year ago, and we've heard many players here, local media availabilities, whatever it may be, voice their frustration with how last year went from a special team standpoint. Certainly was not the secret weapon that it had been in years past, under Shane Beamer here at South Carolina. Now you lose Pete Limbo, bringing Joe DeCamillis, who is somebody that spent 3 decades in the NFL, that has a great mind for the game of football. What kind of difference, if any, can he make on this special teams room? But one thing we know is we're going to have a very good long snapper in Hunter Rogers, handling things as far as getting the ball to either the holder or the punter in good time, though he did have some mistakes that he made a year ago. But again, special teams as a whole was just not in a great place last season, and we'll see if they can get better. But no Kai Kroger on this list. Mitch Jeter probably would have had a chance to be on this list as well if he did not opt to decide to, transfer out to Notre Dame. But not an overwhelming representation of South Carolina on the first, second, and third team list for SEC media days. But, again, it goes back to what we think the message of this team is. Underrate us, undervalue us, and we'll go out there and prove you wrong. And we will see if Carolina is indeed able to do that. But still an honor, regardless of whether you're first, second, and third team, to be included on one of these lists. So shout out those respective players that did find their way on to these lists. Come back and wrap up hour number 1. We'll get to our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100, as halftime show rolls along. Tyler Head along with you on your Friday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head, along with you here on this Friday. Terry Ford not here today. As I said, some issues with the guys getting home from Dallas. He'll be back in on Monday, but you can actually see him tomorrow live from 2 until 4 out at Hardee's, 496 Piney Grove Road. You can bring by some school supplies that will benefit the kids at Richland 1 and Richland 2 school districts, and get yourself a gift certificate for an order of 3-piece chicken strips from Hardy as well. So, again, come by and see Terry at Hardee's at 496 Piney Grove Road tomorrow from 2 until 4 p.m. It is now time for our Firehouse Sub text of the hour, 803-404-6100. Charlie weighs in and says, if Sellers is legit and that defense is pretty good like we expect, I think we can surprise some people. The quarterback can make all the difference, as you know, in college football, and that is 1,000% the truth. And this goes back to a conversation that I had with Chris in the last hour, where let's go back to last offseason. Let's go back to last media days where Spencer Rattler was one of the player representatives for South Carolina after coming off of his first year at Carolina, where, again, things are great. 8 wins, knocked off 2 teams on the foot of the college football playoff. A lot of buzz, right? In South Carolina, similarly to where they finished in 2022, was picked as the 3rd best team in the East. And there's a lot of belief behind that, right? Because, yeah, you had a lot of returning talent, but mainly you had the same quarterback. A quarterback that showed a ton of, his best stuff in those last couple of games of the season after having a so-so to underwhelming first 10 games at South Carolina. So there was a lot of belief like, hey, they're rolling. This guy's legit. Rattler's going to be great this upcoming year. We'll pick him as number 3. Now, Rattler still had a really good year despite everything happening around him. Unfortunately, Carolina could only manage to win the 5 games, but it was easy for people to look at Carolina last year and say, because of Spencer Rattler coming back, I believe this team should not really have any fall off or much fall off, because the most important position, and we're not kidding ourselves here, quarterback is the most important spot, right? So when you know what you have in that quarterback, it's easy to think highly of a team as opposed to one that's a little more unproven. And again, we here, as we've talked about this entire offseason, even last year when Sellers was just the backup of what this guy was going to be when he finally got the reins to South Carolina football, which he is now getting, obviously. But most people aren't tuning in and paying attention to the everyday conversation around South Carolina. They just look and say, okay, 4-star kid, got a few snaps last year as a true freshman. We'll see. You know what I mean? So a lot of people are going to reserve judgment on what you can be until you have a proven quarterback. And I'm looking at this list here, and one thing that sticks out is the highest rated team with a somewhat unknown at quarterback is LSU at 5 with Garrett Nussmeier. Now, Nussmeier, through Jaden Daniels' injuries over his time at LSU, did get a decent amount of playing time. I referenced this before. When Daniels got hurt in the SEC championship game in 2022, Nussmeier came in and was actually, picking apart that Georgia defense a little bit. So we've seen him in more than just like garbage time roles, right? So you even kind of lean a little bit more towards knowing more about Nussmeier than some of these other guys. Tennessee picked at 7. Nico, all the praise in the world of what this guy's going to be. Expected to be the superstar of all superstars out there in Knoxville, the perfect fit for Heupel's offense, all those kind of things. We think. We got to see him in a bowl game. That's a bowl game against Iowa, a team that didn't have its best player on defense. The real test is coming up this year. But even then, with a very talented Tennessee team, by the way, good defense, a lot of guys coming back at wide receiver, it's just the question at quarterback, to where people are still hesitant to think they could be a top 5 team because they don't know how good Nico is. Right behind them at 8, Oklahoma. Again, Jackson Arnold, highly touted guy, comes in to replace Dillon Gabriel, who's moved on to Oregon. All the hype in the world around Jackson Arnold. Went out in the bowl game against Arizona. Didn't play all that great. But again, it's a bowl game. First start. I say cast that to the side. He could be a superstar. He could be a Heisman candidate for all we know. But it's that unknown and not wanting to put the cart before the horse with a lot of these teams as to why maybe they're not ranked a little bit higher. Again, Carolina, as we expected, around that 11th, 13th range, coming in at 13th. And a lot of that has to do with the unprovenness of quarterback, where you just don't know until you see it on display. Now, Sellers could go out there and, throw for 300 yards in the first 3 games of the season, run for a bunch of touchdowns, and then we're going to, be ready to hand him the September Heisman. You know what I mean? But until you see it, you're not going to believe it. And that's kind of the case with a lot of these teams in the SEC as we were going through not quite a full transition period. That'll be after this year when you have Ewers, Beck, Milroe, all those guys eventually move on to the NFL. That will be kind of a true replenishing of quarterbacks across the league. But a lot of new young faces taking over at the helm of their respective schools. And we'll see who can be the most successful. We'll have to say up to North Sellers, because that's going to mean great things for South Carolina, hopefully. Another note for Charlie here in reference to what you said. Defense should be pretty good. I think the defense is going to actually be pretty darn good. Now, does that mean they're going to be a top 5 defense? No. But I think they can be significantly better than they were a year ago, based on returning guys, based on experience, based on what we learned about this defense at the end of last year. It really can't get a whole lot worse, for being honest. And you would like to see, if nothing else, just steps in the right direction. And we will see if that does indeed end up happening coming up this year. Again, 43 days, just 43 more days, right under a month and a half before we finally get some football back in Williams-Brice Stadium, and we'll be off and running for the new era of college football, 12-team playoff, expanded SEC, the whole 9 yards. So excited for it. Coming up next, it's football, and more football in the 1 o'clock hour. Well, let's hear from some coaches across the SEC as Media Days is all done and closed for the week out there in Dallas. That's coming up next, hour number 2 of the halftime show here in the game. Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on this Friday. Flying solo. I just went out into the bullpen area. Jay Phillips is back after their long trip home from Dallas and gave me the details of the wild night that was for the party of three with Jay, Terry, and Elijah, and didn't sound like a lot of fun. So we'll let Terry sleep for the day. We'll get him back in here on Monday and re-rack everything from the wild week that was SEC Media Days. So I want to dive into what we heard from coaches. And again, we heard from all 16. We're not going to be able to get to all of them today. This is going to carry us for several days and in several weeks as we get closer and closer to the start of the season. But of course, really the headliner of the entire week was Texas, right? Like, this was in Dallas. You know, more of the focus seemed to be on Texas than Oklahoma coming into the conference. There was that guy in the ballroom that would ask a question about Texas to every single coach. So Texas was kind of the focal point this week, despite being the new team entering the SEC. And, you know, Steve Sarkisian, who's been around the block for a long time in college football, obviously coached at Southern Cal, coached at Washington, had a stint in the NFL with the Falcons, came back to, Saban's, clinic of rehabilitation of coaches, and now is at Texas, where he seems to have found his footing. And year number 1, not great. Year number 2, a little bit better. Then year number 3 was the best Texas had since, Colt McCoy led him to the national championship back in 2009. And Sark was asked in his media availability, what exactly, in his opinion, made year number 3 so good?
Well, I think part of it was our culture. We had to keep building our culture, the things that were important to us, right? And that takes time. It takes time to learn the schemes. You bring in coaches and you have an idea of what you want to run, and that's nothing against a previous staff, but maybe they didn't recruit the types of players that fit what we wanted to be and how we wanted to play. So that takes time too. There's development of players in your program. And so, hey, I'll tell you this much, 5-7 in Austin, Texas sucks. That was hard. That was hard on me. That was hard on players. That was hard on a lot of people. Okay, 8-5 was a little more palatable for people, right? But as you continue to stay committed to who you are, and you stay committed to your course of action, you stay committed to what you believe in, over time you start to reap the benefits of that. With that comes sometimes you have to people that were supposed to be good players when you arrived maybe aren't playing as much, and maybe the guy that fit you a little bit better, you have to recognize and you have to play him a little bit more. But everybody earned their opportunity in our program over the past 3 years, and the beauty of it has been our players recognize that, and then now they know the process to go make it work. I was telling somebody earlier today about a story about the leaders on our team. When we had Bijan Robinson and Roschon Johnson, everybody raved about their leadership ability, but we only had a couple of leaders. Last year, we raved about the leadership of about 5 or 6 guys, Jordan Whittingtons of the world, right? Byron Murphys of the world. This year, I could probably tell you I got 25 leaders because these guys have grown up in our program. They don't know any different than our culture. And so now when I don't even have to speak very long about what we believe in, because they live it every single day and I watch them live it every single day. And so that's the process, right? You're trying to develop leadership. Well, leadership takes time to develop. You just don't anoint a guy a leader if he doesn't believe in the core values of the organization.
So again, that's Sarkisian talking about what worked for them in year number 3 and why they had the successful season they had, and got him talking about leaders and all that kind of stuff. As I mentioned, Sarkisian's been around for a long time, done a lot of different things, been a head coach in multiple places. What we've not seen from Sarkisian is prolonged success as a head coach. Let's go back to his time at Washington. Spent pretty much the entire time being a around 500 head coach. His final year there in 2013, they went 8-4. Best season he had. And he used that to springboard into the Southern Cal job after famously Lane Kiffin, got fired on the tarmac and all that kind of stuff. And proceeded to go 9-4 in year number 1 out there at Southern Cal. Now, you can discredit that a little bit because despite the fact that they fired Lane Kiffin in 2013, Southern Cal still went 10-4. Remember, Orgeron took over as the interim head coach that year. They still had a really good team. So Sarkisian did not enter a place where the cupboard was necessarily bare at Southern Cal. Went 9-4 in year 1. That's great, but not a lot of people are going to put that on the shoulders of what exactly Sarkisian did. And then year number 2 is when he had, his personal issues that led him to leave that job after only a handful of games, and have to kind of find his way back into coaching. After that, and after the OC job with the Falcons, after being with Alabama, he gets the head coaching job at Texas after, the old Tom Herman experiment goes sideways after a couple years at the helm there. But even then, like, the Longhorns weren't a terrible team in his last year in 2020. They went 7-3. That was okay. They made the Alamo Bowl. They weren't a bottom-feeding team by any means. Sark comes in 5-7. Year number 1, as you mentioned, that sucked. 5-7 in Austin sucks. 8-5 in year number 2. And then steps up and has a phenomenal year in year number 3. Gets Texas to their first ever college football playoff, wins the Big 12, the whole 9 yards. So they come in with a lot of momentum. But there's this hesitancy with a lot of people to, and we know nobody wants to anoint Texas back until we see it on display for multiple years, but also just to see if Steve Sarkisian can have sustained success, because we've not seen that as of yet in his head coaching career. Now, this is obviously his best opportunity to do that with the talent that they have, with the momentum they have coming off of last season, to roll that into another year worth of success. And we'll see if they can do that. My question to you, you can weigh in the Firehouse Subs text on 803-404-6100, because I'm curious. Do you want Texas to succeed? I voted them number 2 in my mock media poll if I was deciding on this. It doesn't mean I want them to succeed. I just think that they are a good enough program that they could theoretically be one of the best 2 teams in the SEC this year. But from like a purely SEC homer standpoint, do you want the Longhorns to come in here and have success in year number 1 in the SEC? Because that's kind of one of my biggest takeaways from this week in listening to not only the Texas contingent talk, but, the vibe of the whole thing was that Texas is very confident. Texas is coming into the SEC thinking that they're going to be able to come in to be successful, which, again, I think that they're going to, but that is just something that's so rare, right? Because the SEC has long been the toughest and best conference in all of college football, where there's this, like, mutual understanding that when you come in, you got to take your lumps. You got to take your beatings in the SEC to harden you, right? To get those calluses on your hands before you can even think about competing on a week-in, week-out basis and a year-in, year-out basis in the SEC. Texas might jump that line. Texas has the ability to come in here and say, yeah, we're good enough already. We're just going to jump to the front of the line, punch our ticket to Atlanta, playoff, whatever it may be. And Texas as itself is already a brand that I feel like people already have an opinion on, that you either love them or hate them. There's a lot of programs around college football that the average college football fan could probably care less about, could probably has no opinion on one way or the other. It's like, if you ask most people about Kansas in football, right, they'd be like, whatever, who cares? They don't love them, they don't hate them, they're just there. But Texas is different, because Texas is a brand, have been a brand for a long time, but one that is probably in a lot of people's eyes unjustifiably thought themselves to be better than they have been. Now again, when Mac Brown had them cooking, national championship with Vince Young. Went back to another one with Colt McCoy. Routinely a team that was playing in like Sugar Bowls and stuff like that, even in the non-championship type of years. Like a great program, one of the best in college football. After that run came to an end, though, Charlie Strong, Tom Herman, just this run of coaches that just didn't end up working out. And the recurring joke of, is Texas back? That, I think, soured them in a lot of people's eyes. that they're this program that just would routinely beat its fist on the table telling you that they mattered when we all know that they didn't. So now that Texas is finally starting to cook again, they do have bragging rights to a degree. And I think that's off-putting to a lot of people. Where if Oklahoma came in and let's say they made it to Atlanta in year number 1, I don't think a lot of people would love that, but Oklahoma is not quite as brash as Texas is, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? I feel like that would be a little more widely accepted by people if Oklahoma was the team that came in and was successful right at the gate. But something about Texas, something about that Texas cockiness, I think rubs people the wrong way, to where, again, the vast majority already hate Texas before they ever came in here. And it doesn't help where you've had this horns down saga fiasco playing out over these past couple years where, and it's not the fans necessarily. You know what I mean? Like, you talk to a Texas fan, like, most of them are going to be like, yeah, I understand that, it's a gesture. If you're an opposing team, you're going to use it. I don't see fans crying about it, but it's the suits, right? It's the corporate front office of Texas football that's, demanded the Big 12 make it a penalty, and Rodney Terry getting students thrown out of the student section was at BYU last year, I think. Those kind of ridiculous things that has only hurt the image of Texas in a lot of people's eyes, to where, again, they come into a new conference already as probably one of the most hated members of it. You know what I mean? And again, I think they're going to be good. I think they're going to be a very good team this year. I have them going to Atlanta to play Georgia in the SEC championship game. And the SEC media poll reflects that as well. But they're not going to make any friends along the way. I can tell you that much. So it'll be interesting to see. Again, let me know your thoughts on Texas, 803-404-6100. We will, how about we stay in the state of Texas? Texas A&M, Mike Elko, entering year number 1 after taking over for the underwhelming Jimbo Fisher out there in College Station. Let's hear a little bit from Mike Elko, what he had to say, and what can we expect from A&M? Because here's the thing. Carolina's going to have to deal with A&M for the foreseeable future. It's still a rivalry game, quote unquote, whether you think it is or not. And that's a team that you're going to have to deal with this year and next year as well. What do we make of the 2024 Texas A&M Aggies? We'll dive into that coming up next. Let's hear from Coach Elko and what he had to say at Media Days yesterday. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Friday on the game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on your Friday on the game, making our way through SEC Media Days and what coaches had to say and what to expect with the 2024 season. We just talked about Texas, and again, let me know your thoughts on Texas, 803-404-6100, if you think or if you want them to be successful or if you want them to suffer the wrath of the SEC in year number one. We'll get to some of those a little bit later on in the show, but we'll stay in the state of Texas. A&M is in a period of transition after moving on from Jimbo Fisher after underwhelming and not bringing a national championship despite being given the trophy and the plaque when he was introduced as head coach a couple years ago. So they went back to the drawing board, hired Mike Elko, coming over from having a successful run at Duke, of course, former defensive coordinator out there at A&M, to get the program to where they think it needs to go. Elko, definitely not like Jimbo Fisher. Definitely a more even keel, less controversial type of figure out there at out there in College Station, and I'm very interested to see what he does. And this is particularly interesting to us here at South Carolina because for the foreseeable future, this is still a team that you're going to have to play. Now, I know when A&M came into the league, they were assigned South Carolina as the rival. Whether you've embraced that as a rivalry or not is certainly up to you. But again, at least for the time being, they're still on the schedule with, a return trip to College Station, them coming to Williams-Rice this year and a return trip to College Station coming up next year as the same 8 teams the Carolina plays this year are just going to flip coming up next year. So you're just going to have to deal with them. And what are they going to be? You face them in November, which is interesting. Coming off a bye week after that rough month of October, taking on Ole Miss, Alabama, and Oklahoma. How good is A&M going to be? They're actually pretty favored for a team welcoming in a first-year head coach in the media poll overall. And I'm curious to see how successful they'll be when South Carolina does end up encountering them. And here's Mike Elko taking the podium yesterday about what the success that he had at Duke says about him and what that is going to mean translating over to A&M.
Yeah, I think have said this to a lot of people in the last 2 years. When you're an assistant coach, you think you know everything it takes to become a head coach. But until you actually go sit in that chair, you have no idea. You have no idea how much of the program you had no idea was being handled by the head coach. And so I think anytime you get in that chair, you grow. I'm extremely thankful to all of the people at Duke. Athletic Director Nina King gave me my opportunity to be a head football coach, and so I'm grateful for her and everything that she did for me there. I think we had tremendous football players in that program, maybe more so than people wanted to give us credit for, and so a lot of that was development, but a lot of that was thanks to David Cutcliffe and the job he did before we got there. But I think being in that chair is the only way to prepare to be in that chair, and certainly now coming back into this conference, the premier conference in the country, that got even stronger this year. Certainly that experience is something you want to lean on as you try to build this program to become what we want to be at Texas A&M.
And, Duke is a tricky place to win, right? You have the high academic standards, all that kind of stuff, where you can't always get the same caliber of talent that you get at an A&M, at an Alabama, whatever it may be. And, he credits David Cutcliffe, who was the long-tenured coach before Elko got the job up there in Durham. But the last couple of years of Cutcliffe were not great. They were under 500 in those final 3 seasons. Didn't make it to a bowl game any of those years. So, he wasn't left a full cupboard or a full complement of talent by any means. That being said, and yes, this is in the transfer portal era, so you are able to turn rosters around a little bit quicker. They still went out there and had a very successful first year going 9-4 back in 2022. Last year, of course, they opened the year with that great win against Clemson at home and seemed to be on track for a lot of success. Again, Riley Leonard gets hurt. Your starting quarterback goes down, that derailed things a little bit. Still went 7-5, and made the Birmingham Bowl. But I think it's a testament to what he can do as a builder of a program that is exactly what A&M needs. Terry and I talked about this when, Jimbo got fired last fall, that, he had never had to build something from the ground up necessarily. He had been handing the keys to a pretty good Florida State program. He inherited an A&M program that wasn't all that bad after, Sumlin got let go, and he just couldn't get them to that next level. Well, again, Elko took a not great Duke program, again, a very hard place to win, and won quickly. Now you bring him into Texas A&M, similarly a place where the cupboard's not bare. I mean, they returned a lot of talent from a year ago. Yes, they did lose, Evan Stewart, Walter Nolan, guys like that, but you got Connor Wakeman back. You've got pieces on the offense. You got pieces on the defense. They shouldn't be terrible. You know what I mean? Like, this is a program that you should theoretically be able to have success at pretty quick, especially given the resources, right? Because that's what, when this job was open, we talked about it being almost kind of like a turnkey operation, right? Like, you've got everything at your disposal, the NIL, the support, the talent-rich state, the recruiting, which Elko was a big part of a couple years ago with that famous #1 overall class. Like, all the ingredients are there for this program to be successful, and it seems that Elko's the right kind of guy to do that. And I want to get to one more cut from Elko here as well, because he's a very, indiscreet, if that's the right word, kind of guy, which is odd, maybe, for a university like Texas A&M. Here's him talking about how he chooses to handle his business quietly as what is deemed a loud university.
I just think you earn the right to have success in the game of football. I think that's a recipe that has stood the test of time, and that's what the offseason is about. The offseason is about being in places where nobody's watching, where no one's following you on Instagram, where nobody's posting about what you're doing, and getting up every day and going to work to become better so that you have a chance to have the success that you want to have in the fall. And so I don't know that I intentionally changed our thought process at Texas A&M. I think that's how I believe programs should be. I think when it's not football time, we should be working, and that's what gets you ultimately the results you want to have in the fall. And so I'm just proud that we've been able to do that so quickly in College Station.
And maybe that's exactly what Texas A&M needs. Maybe they need a coach that's just going to be very much nose to the grindstone, that's not going to be up there, kicking up, media spats with, other head coaches at SEC schools or whatever it may be. Somebody that's just intently focused on the details of winning football. And again, he's got all the success, he's got all the resources at his disposal to make this a really, really good program. Now, again, that's going to be tough for South Carolina, because that's a team that seemingly you're still going to have to deal with on a year-to-year basis. Maybe you can take advantage of them in year #1, where things maybe aren't quite all together just yet. We will certainly, have to see. But I think Elko, to me, and again, he's got a prior history there as defensive coordinator and a big part of that recruiting from a couple seasons ago. I think Elko has a shot at being a very good head coach for the Texas A&M Aggies for years to come. But we will have to see what happens, when things finally do happen, when the season rolls around. Again, Wakeman had a very solid season going last year before he got hurt in that game against Auburn, and things turned over to Max Johnson, who was so-so in his time as a starter there out in College Station. Keep on going. The Kentucky game is really interesting to me. It's such a huge game. As I mentioned earlier, it's a swing game for South Carolina in a lot of ways. Same thing for Kentucky, too. Well, let's hear from Mark Stoops talking yesterday, closing out Media Days, funny enough, and share some thoughts on how this could go for Carolina in that Week 2 matchup up the road in Lexington. That's coming up next. Halftime show, Tyler Head along with you on this Friday here on The Game. Welcome back in. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on this Friday on the game, making our way through what we heard from coaches out at SEC Media Days over the course of the week. And the coach that closed things out yesterday, Mark Stoops, even though I don't know how many people were still hanging around in the ballroom out there in Dallas when Stoops was talking, certainly not a headliner by any means. But funny enough, he would talk about it a little bit yesterday too. He's now the longest tenured coach in the SEC. Mark Stoops has been around for 12 years. Saban was the only one that had been around longer than him, and he is now holding claim to being that longest tenured head coach, in the league, which is crazy when you think about some of the coaches that have come and gone in those 12 years alone. And for Stoops, who's been just perfectly fine, perfectly above average to above average is what Kentucky's been in his tenure. They've had some good wins, 9-10 win years. Never that consistent, like, top-end threat in the SEC necessarily, but a good program nonetheless, and one that Carolina has had some interesting battles with, gotten the better of them the past couple of years, and perhaps there is no bigger game for these two teams on their schedule than against each other in week number 2. It's really the true swing game. And it's the game where I think, personally, we're going to finally find out a lot about both teams. Because think of the similarities, right? Carolina, as we know, new quarterback, revamping its wide receiver room, a lot of new guys brought in on defense, like a lot of unknowns, offensive line, unknowns across Carolina. Same thing with Kentucky. Their defense a little bit more of a known commodity. You got guys like Deone Walker and stuff like that are coming back. But new quarterback and Brock Vandagriff. You bring in Chip Trayanum at running back from Ohio State, who's, again, a highly touted guy, but hasn't really proven himself at the college level yet. So a lot of unknowns with both these teams. And for Kentucky, this is going to be a challenge playing South Carolina and Georgia very early on in the season. Here is Coach Stoops yesterday talking about the challenge of playing SEC opponents early in the season, like they're going to do with, again, South Carolina and Georgia.
Yeah. With jumping into the league play so early, first of all, our, entire focus, and it's not just coach speak, you got to be ready for game 1, on the 31st against Southern Miss. And, but with the league games coming up so quick, you better be a little bit conscientious of how you're handling camp, what you're doing, where you're prioritizing your time, and making sure you're prepared to play some big games very early. It's a long season. It works both ways. Last year, we had the opportunity, to play some non-conference games and build into it. And then, I'll be honest, it was pretty difficult, to go, 7 or 8 straight SEC games. That's a brutal stretch, and it takes its toll on you mentally and physically. So this year it's mixed in a little bit better. And of course, we always end the season with Louisville, and we're in the, and they had such a tremendous season, such a good program. They were very good last year, and we're fortunate to go up, on the road and beat them to cap the season. But that's tough after a tough SEC gauntlet.
Again, when you look at what both these teams face in week number 1, Carolina with Old Dominion, a team that, again, shouldn't really have a problem with, and you would ideally like to see them squash them by about 50 points, get a lot of guys in there. Same thing with Kentucky and Southern Miss, a team that they should be able to beat pretty routinely, to where we're not going to know a whole lot about both these teams going into week number 2. We're just going to be asking questions of, okay, how good is Lenore Sellers? How good is Brock Vandagriff? How good are these defenses? How good are these offensive lines? Those kind of things are still going to be a question. And it's going to be a prove it in week number 2. With, again, 2 programs that look across the aisle and say, yeah, we should beat that team. That's belief on both sides. We know when Carolina beat Kentucky last year, we talked about the saltiness of Kentucky's fan base because that was a game they felt like they should have won. Carolina's a team that they feel like they should beat routinely. They weren't able to do it last year. And vice versa. Carolina feels like they should beat Kentucky routinely, and they were able to do it the past couple of seasons. So, huge game in week number 2 that really sets the tone for the rest of the season for both teams. because, and we've talked about this plenty from the South Carolina perspective, with how tough this schedule is and what we think this team is going to be, getting to 6 wins is going to be very hard. And if you can beat Old Dominion, that's 1 win. Should be able to beat Akron, 2. Vanderbilt, 3. Wofford, 4. Find 2 more wins. That Kentucky game is one of the ones that you look at and say, if we don't win this game, we might have trouble getting to 6 wins this year. Now, again, when they finally take the field and start playing, all these guys for Carolina could be light years better than we ever expected. And then our opinions are going to change, obviously, and we'll say, God, can you believe that we were afraid they might not win 6 games? They're going to go win 10 or something like that. But until we see otherwise, we're going off what we know. And we know this is a tough schedule based on the way it's laid out. We know winning 6 games is not going to be easy. So the Kentucky game, I'm just going to say it is the most important game of the season at this point in time. After that game's over, we'll readjust that to another game. But until then, beating Kentucky in week 2 is an absolute must for this Carolina team to take a step forward and get back to a bowl game in year number 2. And again, they're going to have to do that by dealing with a former very highly touted quarterback in Brock Vandagriff coming over from Georgia. Here's Mark Stoops yesterday talking about Vandagriff and what he brings to the table for the Wildcats offense.
But Brock, what I like about Brock is you saw him, for Georgia's sake, they won a lot of games, and so they're up a lot of points, and so they were able to work some of their backups, even at the quarterback position, because that's very difficult to do, is get QB reps. But when Brock was in there, even if they had a lead or anything, you just saw the way he operated. For us, that's a big deal. We've always been a pro-style offense, and so he was coached well there. It was complex. He was doing the right things, and he could come in and handle our situation, whether I made an offensive coordinator change or Liam had left or whatever happened in that. I forget exactly where it was in that moment, but we felt very good about him being able to handle everything that we're going to ask him to do. He obviously has the talent. He just needs to get under center and get some reps.
Again, going back a couple years ago, this was a guy that was thought as one of the best quarterbacks coming out of high school. He flipped from Oklahoma to Georgia, wanted to stay, play in his backyard. And a lot of people thought he might be the next guy in line after Stetson Bennett graduated. That odd job obviously ended up going to Carson Beck. And, Georgia had a very good season in year number 1 under Carson Beck, so you can't say they had the wrong guy out there in the field. And as, Stoops mentioned, that Vandagriff's gotten to play a lot because Georgia has beaten a lot of opponents by substantial margins to where the backups get in. So he's got plenty of opportunities to play. They just haven't necessarily been meaningful snaps. And this is a different story. He is the starter. He is getting handed the reins of an SEC program. Now he's got to go out there and prove it. And I will say this. Again, I'm from Georgia. I covered the Georgia program. I was there when he committed to Georgia. I was there when he was the backup for a couple of years. The one concern that I always had with Brock Vandagriff is he came from playing Class A football in the state of Georgia. Now, the state of Georgia in high school is good everywhere, right? But as somebody that's watched plenty of single A football at the high school level and plenty of 7A football at the high school level, it's a night and day difference between the competition that you see at single A and the competition that you see at a 7A, right? So Vandagriff was lighting up the world against single A teams in high school. Didn't have to play the toughest competition like 7A or 6A or 5A or anything like that. I've always wondered what that transition as a starter is going to be like for him in college football. Here's the opportunity. Now, again, he could still go out there and be great, but we don't know yet. We don't see that yet. Compared to Noah Sellers, he's gotten more snaps. He's gotten more opportunities to see the field in his college career. Has sat behind the Bennetts and the Carson Becks for a couple years. They're Georgia, so he's definitely more seasoned even for a guy that has not got an opportunity to start just yet. But again, he still hasn't proven anything. And he and Noah Sellers, very much on equal lengths of high upside potential, but still having to go out there and show the world exactly what they're made of. And while this isn't a game that a lot of people around the country, around the conference are going to be talking about, the implications and the magnitude of what this game is for both South Carolina and Kentucky cannot be understated. Huge, huge game in week number 2. And again, you want to go 1-0 every week. Don't want to look past Old Dominion, but I am very, very intrigued to see what happens when Carolina makes their way up to Lexington in the second week of the regular season. Come back, we'll hit our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, wrap up hour number 2 It's Halftime Show. Tyler Head flying solo with you on your Friday, wrapping up the week that was for SEC Media Days here on The Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on your Friday on the Game. If you're watching on the Game TV, sponsored by Shepherd's Glass and powered by our friends at Integrated Media, you can see Terry Ford is here, awake with a giant cup of coffee to his right after he spent the night on the floor of the, whatever the name of the Charlotte airport is. But they had some fun getting back from Dallas, and Terry said this is why he does not fly. So he'll have no problem driving to media days at Atlanta next year, which is a whole lot closer. It is time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. I posed the question at the beginning of the hour because one of my takeaways this week from media days was Texas comes in very confident. And, hey, can't blame them. College football playoff, Big 12 championship, that close to going to the national championship a year ago. I get why they're coming in with a lot of confidence. But for a brand like Texas that people already kind of hate to begin with, unless you're a Texas fan, that rubs people the wrong way coming into the SEC. So my question to you is, do you want to see Texas get humbled, or are you okay with them maybe playing in Atlanta like the media poll already suggests the contingent of media thinks they're going to do when the year is over with? Matt weighs in and says, unlikely to happen, but I'd like to see Texas do worse than Vanderbilt just for an initial humbling. Texas goes to Vanderbilt, right? That's one of their games on the schedule. They'll go to Nashville, and they'll take it over. It'll be burnt orange all over the place, and they'll think, man, if this is what every SEC road game is going to be like, we're going to be just fine. Again, they're going to go to a place like Tiger Stadium and realize that that's not the case. But I get that, and I think a lot of people probably share your sentiment, right? It's like, I know it's probably not going to happen, but if Texas came into the league and went 2-6 in conference play, 1-7 or something along those lines, that would probably shut them up, right? Like, nah, it's not going to be that easy coming in the SEC and being successful right out of the gate. Again, I don't think that's going to happen, but Matt, I don't think you're necessarily alone in wishing that kind of misfortune on Texas this year. Again, very talented. Quinn Ewers is one of the best quarterbacks in college football this year. Guy's going to be in the running for the Heisman. Going to be a top pick if everything goes right in the in next year's NFL draft, and should, like he did a season ago, be able to leave Texas to a lot of success this year. But not going to have a lot of people behind them and supporting them necessarily. So I appreciate the text, 803-404-6100. Before we get out of here for the hour, do want to go out to our guy, Gamecock Larry, on the Love Chevrolet phone lines. Gamecock Larry said he just got out of the hospital, wants to, get a quick word in as we wrap up hour number 2. Gamecock Larry, how you doing today?
Well, I feel a whole lot better than I felt the last 3 days because they were fixing to check me out, they said, and I don't like that kind of talk. But they ain't going to go nowhere until the good Lord gets ready for me. But I got my daughter here. She takes good care of me. I got all kind of nurses. I got gators. I got tigers. I got wildcats. I don't know. I even got a possum. I don't know where the possums come from, but I got one of them 4-hole swamp. But I just want to tell Gamecock Nation, keep on Gamecock Larry in your prayers. I got a hard way to go, but in 12 days, the good Lord is willing, old Gamecock Larry going to hit 9-0. 9-0. Good Lord promised me 11 more so I could say 101. That's all I got to say. I love all you, all your fans, all your friends. You ain't my fans, you're my friends. I ain't got no fans. But keep me in your prayers. Everything's going to be all right. Ain't no need to worry about nothing I can't do nothing about. I can't do one thing about it. There ain't no need to worry about it. Love all y'all. Go Gamecock. Talk to you Monday morning, I hope. Go Gamecock.
Yeah, I appreciate it as always, Gamecock Larry, and always good to hear that you're hopefully doing better. Get out of the hospital. 11 days until The big old 9-0. That is quite an accomplishment, and allow us to be the first to wish you a early getting tongue tied here, a early happy birthday to Gamecock Larry, and hopefully for Gamecock Larry this season for the Gamecocks can be one to remember. Again, I understand where everybody's coming from of not thinking too highly of this team. Being that we talk about them every single day, being that we are more ingrained than the typical college football fan or college football writer or whatever it is, there's reason to be excited. There's a lot of upside potential with this team is maybe the best way to put it. And if Lenoris can be what we think he can be, if Rocket can be what we know Rocket can be, just getting back to the form of what he was a couple years ago, say, Harbor emerges at wide receiver, the Larvadanes, the Jared Browns, those guys end up being solid contributors on the outside. Josh Simon steps up as your, number one wide receiver. Brady Hunt as well. Good dynamic going there. Good offensive line that can stay healthy. We already know the defense should be marginally better than they were a season ago. And again, I'm not sitting here telling you to punch your, buy your tickets to the college football playoff or anything like that, but there's reason to believe this team could be better. Now, again, you got to go out there and prove it on the field. And I could be wrong on this, but if you're believing in this team being better this year, I don't think you're off base. I think if nothing else, this team can get back to a bowl game, which again isn't a massive step forward, but step back in the right direction. And that's what you need to do to calm the fan base down a little bit, because 5-7 sucks, especially after coming off an 8-win year. You just need that step back in the right direction to get people believing again, like, okay, it's going to be fine. Rebuilding, retooling, getting things back going in the right direction for what could hopefully be an even better year number 5. That'll do it for hour number 2 of the halftime show. Going next, we'll get into what is trending at 2, revisit the SEC media poll that came out a little while ago, as well as a new name for the field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's all coming up. It is the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you on your Friday here on The Game. 2 o'clock, welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head along with you, flying solo here on your Friday on the game. It is time for What is Trending at 2. And I'll go back. This came out just before I came on the air for the halftime show. But the SEC media poll is officially out. We've been talking about it all week long, wondering where South Carolina was going to land in the eyes of the contingent that was out in Dallas this week, which did include our own Terry Ford, Jay Phillips, and Elijah Campbell. Here's the good news. For those that missed it, South Carolina did at least get one vote as SEC champion. So that's something. Now, they were the only team to get one vote. LSU, Vanderbilt got 2. Ole Miss got 4. Alabama got 12. Texas got 27. And Georgia got 165. So it's something at least, right? The downside, the bad news, I guess, is that South Carolina was picked 13th overall in the SEC standings, which again, now that we got Texas and Oklahoma, no more East and West, it's just a true 1 through 16 in the SEC in order of how the media projects that they're going to finish. So again, Carolina comes in at 13th, just above Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt. And it's kind of about where I expected. I've said this for a couple weeks that I was expecting South Carolina to fall somewhere between 11th and 13th on these rankings based on what people know about this team, based on what the perception of this team is going into this year. And it's kind of right in line with what they've done pretty much every single year with South Carolina in the Beamer era, where they basically take about where South Carolina was the year prior and just say that's what their expectations are for this upcoming year. Happened after year 1, happened after year 2 as well. So, again, no surprise that they just say, okay, they're probably going to be right about 5-7 once again in year number 3, which, again, when you look at the overall standings of the SEC, would put them, right about 13th in the, if there was, or not 13th, it would technically be 11th because there was only 14 teams in the league last year, but fourth from last in the league, just like they are this year, or projected to be at least. So again, right around that same way. And Carolina's funny, right, in what the opinion people have of them is. Because I think a lot of people look at South Carolina, and when they're good, it's very believable with, the Spurrier days and all that kind of stuff, what Carolina did in year number 2 with the 8 wins and the 2 huge upsets, that it's not like this overly shocking thing when South Carolina's good, right? But when they kind of revert back to the norm, quote unquote, of being around 500 in a lot of people's eyes, then it's just like, okay, they had a good year. Now they're back just being South Carolina. So there's not as much hype about South Carolina this year because I think a lot of people are just kind of thinking they're reverting back to the norm at the end of the day. Like, that one year was fun. 8 wins, big upsets, the whole 9 yards. But now they're back to just being the South Carolina that they expected. Again, goes back to the message that I think Beamer and his team were conveying this week at Media Days, that we know you're going to doubt us. We get that. We didn't give you anything last year to think otherwise. But we're going to go out there and prove you wrong when the season rolls around. 43 days, we'll have to wait and see. With the media poll coming out, which, by the way, no surprise, Georgia at the top, Texas at number 2. Again, that's what I thought. I didn't submit a media poll, but in my mock media poll, I guess you want to call it, I had Texas at number 2 as well. I think the sheer talent that they have is hard to argue against, and I get it. The SEC is a tough league. The grind of the league is going to be a challenge, but sometimes talent can win out at the end of the day. I don't think they're going to go undefeated. May lose a game or 2. But I think they'll be good enough to get to Atlanta, in my opinion. You may think differently, that's fine. In my opinion, I agree with what the contingent at Media Days had to say about Texas. Alabama at number 3. I imagine there was a lot of flip-flopping between Texas and Alabama at number 2. And this goes back to my point where, I kind of already believe this, but after hearing from DeBoer, after hearing from the players, and just the buzz around Alabama in general, that's a program that we will continue to give the benefit of the doubt until they give us a reason otherwise to think so. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to wrap your head around an Alabama team that's irrelevant in the national championship picture. You think about, and we'll cast his first year to the side, ever since year 2 at Alabama for Nick Saban, Bama's always been in that discussion late into the season, right? Go back to the 2019 season where they lost the game to LSU in the regular season, and then they lost the Iron Bowl to Bo Nix in his freshman year, which seems like it was 80,000 years ago now. But they lose the Iron Bowl that year, and what they played in the Citrus Bowl, I think. And it was like this weird realization that, like, what do you mean Alabama's not in the college football playoff? What do you mean Alabama's not in the SEC championship game? Like that, it's such a weird dynamic when they have nothing to do with the national championship, when they've lost too many games to be a factor in the national championship. And again, that's just the benefit of the doubt that we're going to give them, I feel like, until they prove otherwise. If they go out there and suck this year, if they're, look at their schedule here. If they come out of the gate and lose their first handful of conference games or whatever it may be, then that narrative will finally kind of shift. But until we see it with our own eyes, we're going to continue to give the benefit of the doubt. Yeah, so their first, let's see here. Their first couple of conference games, Georgia, Vanderbilt, South Carolina. Then they go to Tennessee and Missouri. So let's say they lose to Georgia, then they lose to Tennessee, and then lose to LSU in early November, where the best they can go is 9-3. Like then, I think opinions will start to shift a little bit. But and DeBoer is a winner, as we talked about. Kalen DeBoer has won everywhere, right? Sioux Falls, Washington. Now he's coming into Alabama. This is a guy that success just follows him wherever he goes. And really, from a resume standpoint, there's probably not anybody better to take over for Nick Saban at Alabama. And again, the talent's still there. Milroe's coming back for another year. Defense is going to reload like it always does. Didn't lose a ton in the transfer portal. Like Caleb Downs, yeah, that's a tough loss. But still, for the most part, you got a lot of good talent. This team has all the recipe and ingredients for still being successful. And they just got to go out there and execute. And again, until we see otherwise, we're going to believe that Alabama is still one of the best teams in the SEC. Real quickly, wrapping up the top 5 here. Ole Miss, number 4. Again, with the talent they brought in from the transfer portal and the guys they have coming back, there's no reason they should not be a top 4 team in the SEC. Then LSU at number 5. This is interesting because I don't think their defense is going to be that much better. Probably be a little bit better. Can't really get worse than it was a season ago. But I don't know if they have enough to be like a playoff contending type of team. What they do have compared to like a Tennessee or an Oklahoma or even like a South Carolina, Kentucky, they have a quarterback that, yes, is taking over the starting reins for the first time, but one that we know a little bit more about. We've got to see Garrett Nussmeier play plenty for Jaden Daniels when he's dealt with his injuries in his time at LSU. So we know, and meaningful snaps too, not just garbage time. So we know a little bit more about Garrett Nussmeier, somebody with a good arm. I brought this up earlier. In the 2022 SEC Championship game, he was doing a number on Georgia's secondary. You know what I mean? Like, he actually was playing a very good game against a very good defense. So a lot of reason to think that he can keep things going offensively. Not to the level of what Jaden Daniels did, because that was just ungodly numbers last year, but still pretty good. Now, again, I think the defense is going to hold him back, but we'll see what happens. Elsewhere on What's Trending At 2, I mentioned this a moment ago, that Alabama has come up with a new name for its field at Bryant-Denny Stadium. To the surprise of no one, it is now Saban Field at Bryant-Denny Stadium, that receiving unanimous approval from the Alabama Board of Trustees a little bit earlier on today in honor of course, Nick Saban as he makes his transition off of the, sidelines and into the media booth. Listen, I could sit here all day and read off his list of accomplishments. You know them. We're all aware he's the greatest college football coach that ever lived. Most successful one at that. He's better than Bear. I know that's sacrilegious to say around some parts of Alabama, but I think he's proven it. It's a far tougher and more competitive era of college football now than it was back in the day, and Nick Saban came through and won a ton. And if he would have stuck around for another 10 years, probably would have won a few more national championships, for being honest. So a very rightful honor to bestow upon Nick Saban. And much like Steve Spurrier gets Spurrier Field down there at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium in the Swamp, naming the field after your most successful coach, Vince Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium now, out there in Georgia. And, it's cool to see when the coach can still be alive to see those kind of things, you know what I mean? Saban looks like the epitome of health. It's going to be around for a long, long time, it seems like, but very cool that I'm sure there'll be a ceremony for their first game of the season to formally announce, to formally name it, and he'll be there and all that kind of stuff. So that'd be kind of neat to see. And again, you don't have to love Alabama football or even love Nick Saban to respect what he did as a head coach. And again, I say it with no hesitation, greatest head coach that's ever lived. And despite the fact that he was a thorn in the side of so many programs around the SEC for a decade and a half, now that he's retired, I think we all appreciate the fact that we, in whatever capacity, got to be around to witness the Nick Saban era of college football, because there is unlikely to ever be another coach as successful and as polarizing as what Nick Saban was to the game of college football in the University of Alabama. So a well-deserved honor for Nick Saban there. Nick Saban, in his time at Alabama, won quite a few SEC championship games, including his last one this past year. So all those trips to Atlanta, 15 Western Division titles, 11 SEC championship games. What's the future of the SEC championship game? Sam Pittman had some thoughts on that. I want to dive into that coming up next. It is the Halftime Show. Tyler Head along with you on your Friday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head along with you. Flying solo today, going up until 3, and then I believe I'm handing things off to Jay for the post-game show today. Again, the crew out there in Dallas had a rough night getting back, so if they're a little tired, please forgive them, as it's been a busy week, and the weather and things definitely threw them for a loop in terms of trying to get back to Columbia last night. We are entering a great era of unknown when it comes to college football. New SEC, new Big Ten, new Big 12, new ACC, a lot of realignment, obviously, 12-team playoff coming up in December. And with that, especially with the magnitude of change that we have going from 4 teams to 12 teams, there's always going to be a ripple effect, right? The effect of the 4-team playoff rendered the other, what we now know as New Year's Six bowls, obsolete in a lot of people's eyes, where we have players opting out. It no longer meant as much to win the Sugar Bowl when it was a national semifinal game. That's been quelled a little bit because all these games do now factor into the national championship, but that was the ripple effect of what happened when you expanded to 4 teams. I'm very interested to see what our thoughts on conference championship games are going to be now that we're expanding in the 12-team playoff, especially in reference to the SEC championship game. Yesterday, Sam Pittman, who has been on the sidelines for many SEC championship games, has not brought his Arkansas team there. I don't think they will this year either. But he was asked his opinion on the SEC championship game and if it should stick around in this ever-evolving era of the college football playoff.
I'd like to get to the damn SEC championship game. Is what I'd like to do. I'll say this. The game has hurt the league in the past. I don't think it, and I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if Mr. Sankey would agree with me, but, I remember when I was at Georgia, it hurt us. And then, obviously, this last year, it hurt Georgia. It's not going to now, obviously. Will there be some communication about that? Probably. But don't you want to see who the conference championship, who's the winner, I'd hate to see that game go. I know 17 is a long season, but I do think I think whoever's the top seed has an opportunity to host. I think that would be, they've earned it throughout the year. I think that would be the best way to do that.
Coach, we'll go in the center section.
Until you get to the bowl situation, and then we cannot cut any of the bowls out. None. Those are a way to get better and get your younger kids practicing. So, and I'm talking about, I don't mean Orange, Rose, and all that. I mean Liberty, Mayo. We need to continue to keep those.
And he's very right on that the SEC championship game has hurt the league in a way many times over the years. Let's just look in the college football playoff era alone, where 2018, 2019, 2021, 2023, in 2023, all those years, there was the chance for, maybe not 2023, but those other years, where you had 2 teams that were already in the top 4 prior to the championship game playing a de facto elimination game because they knew the loser was probably going to be left out. Now, you do have the circumstance of Georgia and Alabama in 2021 where Georgia still got in, but there have been so many years. I go back to 2019 specifically, a game that Sam Pittman was on the sideline for at Georgia. I was working in Athens at the time. We talked so much leading up into that game. Georgia was number 4 in the playoff standings, and LSU was number 1. That it would benefit the league the best to just cancel the game, right? Because then they would have to put both teams in the college football playoff. We obviously know LSU won and went on to win the national championship with that amazing Joe Burrow-led team. But for years, outside of, again, 2021, where both teams got in regardless, the SEC championship game has served as a de facto elimination game, like a quarterfinal in a lot of ways, with the winner advancing in and the loser being out. And that's not advantageous to the league, right? So now you enter the 12-team era, and what we assume will be the case more often than not, whoever the top two teams going to Atlanta are going to be in regardless. Like if Georgia and Texas play for the championship this year, that means they're probably both going to be in regardless of who wins and who loses. Now, that being said, the caveat is, of course, now you have first-round bye at stake. If you win the SEC championship game, you get a bye and don't have to play the first-round games at whatever home or away site, however it ends up being. So there's a benefit to that, in addition to the trophy and the banner and the pomp and circumstance of all that. However, we already know that the college football playoff is on the verge of expanding again. Rich Clark the other day at SEC Media Days, he's the executive director of the college football playoff, said that they're going to wait until after this whole year is done with, after we crown the national champion for the first time in the 12-team format, to start discussing expanding the format again, whether it be 14 teams or 16 teams. But we know it's going to come, right? If the discussion about it being a discussion is already happening, it's going to happen somewhere down the road. And if we eventually get to 16, which I think we're going to, what's the value of the SEC championship game then? Does it serve a purpose? Because especially in a 16-team format, the top two teams in the SEC are going to be in 10 out of 10 times. You know what I mean? And with that format, there would be no buys. There would be nothing to play for necessarily, right? Because, you're playing for seeding at that point. Yeah, you could technically run into winners a home seed, losers has to be an away seed. Like, there's something there, but not nearly as beneficial as having a game off, right? Not to mention the fact, from even this year's standpoint, an added game where, say, Texas is number 2, Alabama's number 3, they still get in, right? Bama is the, 9th seed. Texas, if they lose, is the 7th seed. Well, now it benefits Alabama more as a lower seed to have sat out that 13th game, right? Texas has another week of wear and tear. Texas has another week of players potentially getting injured. Yes, it's still an honor to be able to play in the SEC championship game, but in your pursuit of the national championship, especially if you're going to be in the playoffs anyway, what purpose does it serve other than trying to get that bye? So it's an interesting discussion to have. I don't think the SEC championship is going to go anywhere because of the money tied up in it, the benefit it brings to the city of Atlanta, all that kind of stuff. Because we know money drives everything in this sport. But the value of it is certainly diminished in a 12-team playoff. And I think if, like I'm expecting to happen in a handful of years, maybe even 2 years, who knows? If we get to a 16-team format, I think it loses its value almost completely outside of, again, the trophy and the banner you can hang up. Because if you're not really building an advantage into yourself by winning the game, what's the point? Probably going to apply the same way to the Big Ten Championship too, because more often than not, top two teams in that league probably also going to get in. We'll see about the ACC and the Big 12. That may still serve as a elimination game some years, which can have some juice to it, obviously. But for the top two leagues, SEC and Big Ten, the value is diminished. That's for sure. Maybe my opinion will change. Again, we go into the unknown here. There's going to be a lot of feelings and emotions changing over the course of the season as it plays out. And maybe when we get December, I'll feel differently. But right now, I still see a slight devalue in this version of the SEC championship game with the potential for an even less or even more decreasing value as time goes along. So we'll see what happens. It is July the 19th. And because we've been out at Media Days all week, we've not had a chance to do this, but it is now a chance to return to the greatest day in the history of the world. Coming up next, it is the Halftime Show. Tyler Head along with you on your Friday on the game. Welcome back in. It's the halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on The Game. It is indeed time for the greatest day in the history of the world, July the 19th. Let's take a look back on things that happened on this day. 1989, the NFL owners vote unanimously to form the World League of American Football, which would later become NFL Europe, which operated from 1991 to 2007. And this was originally called the World League of American Football because, unlike NFL Europe, this actually did feature teams from the United States, very briefly, at least, as the league only ran from 1991 to 1992. Here's some team names that you may have never heard of, or if you were a fan of this league, this may bring back some memories. Sacramento Surge, San Antonio Riders, Orlando Thunder, Birmingham Fire, because every startup football league has to have a team in Birmingham, right? The Ohio Glory, the Raleigh-Durham Skyhawks, the Newark, New Jersey Knights, and the Montreal Machines. This played alongside the Barcelona Dragons, the Frankfurt Galaxy, and the London Monarchs. Again, the original iteration of this only ran from 1991 to 1992. What we would eventually become to know as NFL Europe, restructured and formed in 1995 and ran all the way through 2007. Teams like the Amsterdam Admirals, Frankfurt Galaxy made its return, Hamburg Sea Devils, who are some of these other teams? Berlin Thunder. Those are teams that would end up running with the league to its completion in 2007. If you're like me, who grew up playing the Madden games, these were always the teams that if you wanted to play an easy game, right, on like just play now mode, you would take like, I don't know, trying to think mid-2000s here. You take like the Colts and you play like the Hamburg Sea Devils because all the players on NFL Europe teams were rated very lowly. Kind of like in the old college football games when you would schedule like FCS Southeast or some FCS school and they're actually featured in the game because you just want to run up the score on someone. Like that's what the NFL Europe teams were essentially in those Madden games. So those names kind of ring memories in my head when I hear those. So that's interesting that officially formed on this day back in 1991. 1990, Pete Rose was sentenced to 5 months in prison for tax evasion. Pete Rose, for as amazing a career on the field as he had, nonetheless, always controversial on the field. The less said about that, the better. But yes, tax evasion going in the long list of not so great things that he did off the field when it came to Pete Rose's career here. A lot of SB stuff happened on this day as we're obviously, in that week of when the ESPYs and the All-Star game and all that kind of stuff happened. How about this? 1996, the Summer Olympic Games opened in Atlanta. I believe that was when Muhammad Ali lit the torch, if I'm remembering that correctly. Fun fact about the 1996 games, I was, July the 19th, I was a month old, just over a month old, when the torch passed through my hometown. There's pictures of me and my family at the running of the torch ceremony as it was coming through Covington, Georgia. So I got to see the Olympic torch as a mere infant before it made its way into Atlanta. And they officially lit the torch to start the Olympic Games. So that happened on this day back in 1996. And then 2020, Formula One driver Lewis Hamilton wins a record 8th Hungarian Grand Prix in Budapest to equal Michael Schumacher's record of wins at a single circuit. Michael Schumacher had 8 wins at the French Grand Prix. Funny enough, this is the weekend of the Hungarian Grand Prix once again. I'm a motorsports guy. If you listen to me on this radio station for any length of time, you know that. NASCAR is my number 1. I watch plenty of IndyCar. Formula One's number 3. I enjoy Formula One. Don't get to watch it as much and, not quite as invested in it, but very familiar with what goes on over there. Lewis Hamilton's career is so interesting. 7 world championships, just a ridiculous amount of wins. But these past 2-3 years, fallen off. Now, he did win the last event at Silverstone, but that was his first win since 2021 in that great battle that he had with Max Verstappen for the F1 World Championship. And if that's not an indication of how much the car matters in F1, I don't know what is. Lewis Hamilton, phenomenal driver. Max Verstappen, a phenomenal driver as well. But the car they have under them matters so much in that form of racing, because Lewis Hamilton didn't forget how to drive, didn't forget how to win. So the fact that he went from winning an average of 10 races a year to nothing in 2022 and 2023 just because Mercedes kind of fell off the face of the earth, that should tell you how important cars are in Formula One racing. So again, that is the greatest day in the history of the world. I want to get back into some stuff that happened over the course of SEC Media Days. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll re-rack it once again. Nick Saban, who again has now found his place on the media desk with the SEC, or SEC network out there at Media Days, did have some encouraging words in what he saw at the University of South Carolina in terms of coming into this year.
You know, they're really not that far off. Yeah. They weren't that far off last year. I think they're 5-7, whatever, but they lost a couple really close games that could have made a huge difference. And they did have a ton of injuries. Yep. They are going to have a new quarterback, but this guy is a talented guy. Yeah. And they've got more depth in the offensive line than they've had in the past, and they do have a lot of experience back on defense. So they have some parts of their team that really could, if it works out, could work out very well for them.
I said this earlier. I think Lenore Sellers should put talented guy dash Nick Saban in the bio of his Twitter or X account, whatever we're calling it now. High praise. But Saban's right. As we've kind of been talking about all day, really all week long since we heard from Beamer and company at SC Media Days, what they have gives you reason to believe that they're going to be good. How good, we'll see. But they certainly did their job in the offseason of making this roster better, improving at several spots. Adding depth was so huge at many of the spots, right? Offensive line, because, knock on wood, you really hope you're not going to deal with the same amount of injuries you did there a year ago, but nevertheless went out there and addressed that need regardless. Defensive line, defensive front as a whole, maybe didn't need as much in the portal, but they still went out there and got guys. They brought in, DeAndre Jules. They brought in Monkel Goodwine from Alabama. They reset the edge room, brought back Gilbert Edmonds, brought in Kyle Kennard. Dylan Stewart comes in as a true freshman. Like that position group got better. Again, Sellers has a high upside. He's got to go out there and prove it, obviously, but if he can live up to the potential of what we think he can be, he's going to be very, very special here at South Carolina. And again, that is literally the greatest coach in college football history looking at South Carolina and giving his thoughts and opinions. And not far off. It's not saying they're going to go to Atlanta, but not far off. I don't think it's a terrible place to be. As I mentioned a little bit earlier with the SEC media poll coming out, Carolina at 13, Arkansas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt rounding out the list 14 through 16. There's a gap there, right? Where the difference between where Carolina is and where Arkansas is, I think is pretty significant, right? It's not a Grand Canyon by any means, but I don't think Arkansas is right there on the heels of South Carolina, if that makes sense. Because I think the program of Carolina is in a whole lot better shape than what Arkansas is right now. Mississippi State, in the middle of a rebuild with Jeff Levy. Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt. So I take that 13th rating with a little bit of a grain of salt because I do think there's a big difference between 13th and where 14th through 16th are so far. And again, I think Saban's comments kind of echo that a little bit. We'll come back. We'll wrap up today's edition of the Halftime Show. Get our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. See what's on your mind here on your Friday on the Game. Welcome back in. Halftime show. Tyler Head along with you here on your Friday on the Game. Before handing things over to the postgame show, I believe with just Jay Phillips. I've not gotten official confirmation on that yet, but somebody on the halftime or the postgame show coming up here in just a couple of minutes. It is time for our Firehouse Subs text of the hour, 803-404-6100. I asked, at the beginning of the last hour, your thoughts on Texas, and if you love them, hate them, or anything in between. Nameless Texter weighs in and says, as Pac-10, Pac-12 fan, I blame Texas for them being in the condition the Pac is in now. If they would have joined 10 years ago, the Pac would still be thriving. I want Texas to suffer just like the Pac conference is. It's a good way to put it. And that may be something that people aren't as familiar with, because it looked like a couple of years ago that Texas and Oklahoma were going to be joining the Pac-12 and potentially making it the Pac-14 or 16 or whatever it would have been at that point in time. The way I understand it, I believe this is when Larry Scott was running things out there in the West Coast. I believe they're the ones that shot down Texas and Oklahoma joining. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that was more on the Pac-12 than it was Texas, because it seemed like Texas was eager to go, that they wanted to join the Pac-12 and leave the Big 12 at that point in time. But I think, if I remember correctly, that was more on the Pac-12 not wanting to bring them in, because when the Pac-12 fell apart over the course of last summer, I remember that was something we talked about a lot, that was kind of one of their potential downfalls, was not being able to land Texas and Oklahoma all those years ago, because they believed in the brands they currently had out there in the league. And again, if Texas and Oklahoma were in the league for all those years, the value of what their media rights deal could have been last year, which is the whole reason why the Pac-12 went under, because they just were lacking brands for the most part, with Southern Cal and UCLA already gone. Having Texas and Oklahoma there probably could have helped that cause out a lot more, and we could potentially still have a Pac-12 at this point in time. The Big 12 may not exist, I don't know, but the domino effect on that is certainly something that is interesting to revisit, especially with what we know now of the chaos that's been realignment. Before we get out of here, I want to get one more clip in from Media Days. Lane Kiffin, after speaking to the media the other day, sat on the SEC Network desk with Paul Feinbaum and gave him a good ribbing over their interesting relationship over the years. Here's Kiffin and Feinbaum with a pretty entertaining little back and forth.
Then I'll steal your line, but I was going through a deep depression over this incorrect guilt that you tried to lay on me, which preceded that move. Had something to do with Southern California.
Oh, yeah. When you got me fired at USC, I got myself fired at USC, but you didn't help.
It's a better story if I got you fired.
You really did. Because it is a true story that the athletic director and the president were on that trip. We were playing that night, and you were on College Game Day, and you had to make your big splash, and they were watching it, because I know the other person in the room that was watching it with them, and you said what a joke I was, and I'm the Miley Cyrus of college football coaching, and I should be fired, and they looked at each other, and later that night I was fired.
Yeah, by the way.
So, but hey, look what happened. I would have never gotten to work for Coach Saban. All these other things wouldn't happen, so I appreciate you for helping getting me fired. Thank you.
Look at what you're doing today. You're predicted to go to the playoffs. And look at Miley Cyrus. She's had a nice comeback.
So you're wrong with that. I mean, you put me down with that. So really, I don't really know what you're good at. Like, you predicted that Coach Saban was done. That didn't happen. You basically said Miley Cyrus stinks, and she's still going.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's always great to be ridiculed by Lane Kiffin here at SEC.
Ooh, that's a little prickly there, isn't it? Now, Kiffin was not his zany one-liner self necessarily at his podium earlier on this week. He had a few things in there, but of course he lost his dad a couple days ago, so probably wasn't in the most festive of moods necessarily, but you can tell there's some animosity there between him and Paul Feinbaum, and that game in reference that he's referencing there from when he was at Southern Cal, a 62-41 loss to Arizona State in week number 5 of the season, dropped Southern Cal to 3-2 on the year, fired on the tarmac. Funny thing is, Ed Orgeron took that team over. They still went 10-4 on the year and won the Las Vegas Bowl, so they weren't a terrible team by any means, but that's where his journey to getting back to being a head coach began. Obviously went to Alabama for a couple years, the Saban School of Rehabilitation, went to FAU, obviously has now made his way back to Ole Miss, but I would not be surprised if for a while, maybe he still does have it, that Lane Kiffin might have a Paul Feinbaum dartboard somewhere in his house, that he's maybe a little salty about what went down there. It is cool, it is something, though, that he took responsibility for getting himself fired at Southern Cal. There was a lot going on there. And again, remember, he left Tennessee after 1 year there, after a pretty successful year there at that. He beat Alabama and took himself out to Southern Cal. And again, was successful to a degree there, but there was a clashing of heads, certainly, that ended up leading to his ultimate downfall after just a couple of years. That was only his 5th year in the program, in which he'd had top 3 finishes in his respective side of the Pac-12 in his 3 years prior. So they weren't a bad team, and again, they were successful even in the year after he was gone. But it took him a while to work his way back into high-level coaching at the college football ranks before getting back to Ole Miss, where, again, they had a historic season last year. 11 wins, won the Peach Bowl, most successful season in school history. And now, again, with the talent that they brought in this past offseason, I think they have a good shot at making the college football playoff. I have them in my college football playoff, to be exact. So we'll see what happens there, and we'll see what kind of things Paul Feinbaum might say about Lane Kiffin this year and in the years to come, now that he does have a program towards the top of the SEC. I don't think Feinbaum's going to be responsible for getting him fired again anytime soon, unless controversy comes about, which Lane Kiffin's not always far from, to be honest. Well, Joey Freshwater, I'm sure, makes his way around the Grove there and in Oxford from time to time. But that'll do it for today's edition of the Halftime Show. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Coming next, it's the postgame show with, I think, Jay Phillips. We'll have to see. But it's been a fun week covering everything from Media Days. We'll be back to kind of normal next week as we get closer and closer to the start of college football season. That'll do it for today's edition of the Halftime Show. I'm Tyler Head. You're on the game.